Thank you for joining me on the Me and White Supremacy virtual pilgrimage. My name is Reverend John Borthwick, and I'm encouraging my congregation to read with me, or at least follow along in my personal reflections on the book by Layla Saad, Me and White Supremacy. This week we're at week 17, and it's what is tokenism? And the definition that Layla gives in the book is this. Tokenism is defined as the practice of making only a perfunctory or symbolic effort to do a particular thing, especially by recruiting a small number of people from underrepresented groups in order to give the appearance of sexual or racial equality within a workforce. In the case of white supremacy, tokenism essentially uses BIPOC as props or meaningless symbols to make it look like anti-racism is being practiced while continuing to maintain the status quo of white as the dominant norm. Tokenism is one of those things that, as I've journeyed through this pilgrimage, I've been very much aware of, and certainly through the season that we've been through over this past year and more, just related to how we understand anti-racism and how we make that shift, how we dismantle the systemic racism that exists. And I hear it a lot within certain communities around how do we, by representation, by hiring practices, how do we ensure that BIPOC is more at the table, more involved, more present, more engaged in a variety of different spaces and places where they maybe haven't before. And I must admit, I want to be able to understand better what it is in me and within those who identify as white, as who immediately go to that place of, it seems like, tokenism. Now it's interesting when the dominant, the white supremacist culture, uses the term tokenism as a way of defining what they see when someone is hired who is BIPOC, when someone is brought into a gathering, when representation in media, in movies, in advertising is BIPOC. The commentary I hear from those who identify as white often is, this seems like tokenism. And is this just a thing we're going through for now? And what I want to excavate within me and within that sort of mindset, and what I want to name in this reflection today is really that idea of that's been a theme throughout this book and throughout this journey and through other things that I've certainly read around anti-racism, that when you're a part of the dominant culture, when you're a part of the narrative that seeks to be the center of everything, when it's assumed that white is the norm, it does become challenging for that mindset, that bias, that way of seeing and understanding the world, to allow for difference to be a part of the conversation. So here could be theoretically a logical argument that's used, and I've heard it many, 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 many times around hiring practices. Let's hope that whoever is hired is BIPOC. And then the person will say, a person will say, well, I hope the best candidate is the person who gets the job and not just BIPOC. Right. Now that seems logical. And it seems logical in a white-centered, dominant, supremacist way of seeing the world. Because when those who present as white, or those who identify as white, see the world, they continue to have this notion that race doesn't play into any sort of hiring practices, or that race shouldn't be the question when we are engaging in hiring, or who we're putting forward in leadership, that really it should be the best candidate. But when we think about all the things that relate to this journey of dismantling systemic racism, first, one needs to acknowledge all the ways in which there's been barriers stumbling blocks, things put in place that haven't allowed BIPOC to have access to a variety of different spaces and places within within the employment world, perhaps. There's so many ways in which that has been that BIPOC has been disadvantaged by a system that is designed to disadvantage certain people and advantage other people. So I think when we're thinking about this idea of, well, is it just tokenism? I think we really need to be aware of and drill down on that if we're going to make a change and change the system, there will need to be some intentionality around bringing new and different and diverse voices into spaces that were generally not occupied by BIPOC. That we're going to need to make that those who identify as white are going to need to sometimes make room to step aside to allow for other persons with different perspectives, different ways of seeing the world, to be present at those tables. And that our immediate reaction should not be that this is just about tokenism. That while the lens of race needs to be seen when we are thinking about our corporate culture, our leadership culture that's out there in the world, or just the world in general, everyone should have the opportunity to see someone who looks like them, someone who has been raised in a certain cultural perspective as them, as examples of people and spaces that one could occupy. At least that's my hope. But that's going to take some time. And we need to be mindful that we're not just doing this so that we fulfill our quota or make sure that we have a face. And you know, there's been times where I've seen this, where people have been used who are BIPOC as a way of offering diversity to an organization that is essentially white. It's as white can be, and yet one person who's BIPOC gets put into a picture for an advertisement. We got to stop doing that. Things have got to change that way. And maybe this is ridiculous, but it would be wonderful to see that someday we would be able to celebrate each person's, the fullness of someone's humanity, from a racial perspective, a sexual perspective, just from where they've come from, who they are, and we can celebrate that fully and not have to see it as something that we need to add into the mix in a token way, just so that we might, show everyone that we're doing the work, that we're actually inviting everyone to come into the table in an equal way, and that we're continuing to move the barriers to allow all to have an opportunity to be at that table. Those are some of the thoughts that I have as I think about tokenism today. There's much more to say. But may we continue to do what is right and not what is easy. Thank you.